Hello everyone. My name is Kristen Russell and I'll be your teacher for the last channel session this evening. Let me know that you can see and hear me and you're ready to rock and roll through some neuroanatomy by typing down below here. Hey Luke, how's it going? Hi Liz, Leanne, Varun, Abdul. Looks like we have an awesome gang here today. Now, I am very curious, how far along are you in your class at this point? Where in your course are you? Varun just finished Cars 2, only one class in. Matthew, so each session gets archived, so you can go back and watch a previous session, or if you can't stick around tonight, you can go in later and watch the archive of this specific session. Leanne, you didn't do it yet, but you read the chapter, finished Unit 2, starting, okay, so you guys are all over the board, which is pretty exciting, but hopefully you've attended some channel sessions before. If you have not, then welcome. We're very glad to have you. Tonight, behind the scenes, you have both Tyler and Rohini, so you can feel free to ask them any questions that you come up with over in that Q&A. Now, does anyone know what chapters they probably should have read tonight before attending this session? It'll definitely make things a little bit easier. I'm not going to kick you out if you haven't read them, but does anyone know what chapters were probably going to be helpful? Chapters 1 and 2, specifically chapter 1 of the behavioral sciences. So that's going to be a major thing we're going to be talking about tonight. Liz says all of them. Now, ideally, you are going to read all of them, but of course, we need to do practice as well. So biology chapter 4 is another chapter that's going to be pretty helpful for dealing with the nervous system. Now, I'm going to go ahead and list out some of the science content review videos that are also associated with things we're going to be talking about tonight. So if you want to go ahead and jot those down in your notes, if this is an area you really need some extra work on, those science content review videos on your syllabus are super helpful. They're only 5 to 20 minutes long. You can stream them from your iPhone. I've tried it. It's pretty awesome, so make sure you're checking those out. So for tonight, we have lots of good stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about the different divisions of the nervous system, something you're probably pretty familiar with, but we're going to ask some good questions about these. We're also going to talk about specific regions of the brain and what they're involved in, what they do for us, and what can happen if they're damaged. So let's kick things off with our divisions of the nervous system. All right, so when we started off, we're going to break things down into the central and peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system contains the brain and the spinal cord. But tell me this, our brain, it's really important, right? We need to protect it. So what covers up the brain? What covers up our brain? We do have some bones there, yeah, our skull, and we have meninges. There are 3 layers of the meninges. Anyone know what they are? 3 layers. My favorite one's that one in the middle. It's a pretty cool name. All right, Luke. Yeah, Luke, you got one. The dura mater's on the outside. Then we have the cool spidery one in the middle, the arachnoid mater. Yeah, the spider thing, Liz, absolutely. And then on the inside, we have the pia mater. Now, outside of that, of course, we have bone. Outside of that, we have skin. So we got to cover up this thing. There's important stuff in here. Now, once we get into the brain itself, we see both gray and white areas. So that gray matter. What is gray matter in the brain? Justin says cell bodies, and that is absolutely right. It's both cell bodies and dendrites. All right, so what are we missing? What then must be the white matter? Yeah, the axons are white. What makes them look white? What makes them look white? Myelination, absolutely. So you tell me, what are we going to see on the outer part of the brain? So if you cracked open someone's skull, are you going to see the gray or the white on the outside? Okay, so this is a good question to ask because in the brain, you're going to see the gray matter on the outside. Okay, now in the spinal cord, you're going to see the white matter on the outside. So it's different for the brain and the spinal cord. Now, remind me, what is the point of myelination? Why do we have axons that are myelinated? Yeah, it's insulating and it helps speed up that signal conduction, absolutely. So if we start to have problems with our myelin, what is a possible disorder we may have? We are going to talk about Parkinson's, and that's a specific area we're going to look at later. Now, one where we see lesions in this white area, specifically one that comes to mind for me at least, is multiple sclerosis. And what are some of the symptoms of multiple sclerosis? We can think about what would happen if I slowed down this signal and it wasn't occurring as quickly as it should. Decreased mobility, loss of muscle function, less coordination. You might have tingling, numbness. It can become extreme, but these are all related to slowing down that signal conduction. All right, so our spinal cord. We said there's white matter on the outside. Well, there are a few different regions of the spine that we want to be familiar with. There are 5 of them. Let's see if I can get a few listed down below. I bet you know them. Regions of the spine. Lumbar, you got 1, second to lowest. Thoracic is our second to highest. Yeah, sacral, that's the very bottom. Cervical, nice. And we have our coccyx at the very, very bottom. All right, so that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about the central nervous system. Pretty easy to wrap our heads around, brain and spinal cord. What are we talking about if we're dealing with the peripheral nervous system? What's in the peripheral nervous system? Okay, so let's not get into divisions quite yet, but Vinicius, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Laureen, there we go. When we're talking about what actually is composing the peripheral nervous system, we're talking about all of our nerve tissue, our 12 cranial nerves, and our 31 spinal nerves. Now, the really good news is you don't have to have the 12 cranial nerves and the 31 spinal nerves memorized for the MCAT. But I can pretty much guarantee you're going to have to learn those in medical school. So we've dodged a bullet for today. We don't have to know those, but there are lots of other things we're going to have to know about the nervous system. So the central nervous system, pretty simple in terms of the division breakdown, not necessarily simple in structure. But our peripheral nervous system has several more divisions that we're going to get into here. Now, before we actually dive into those divisions, let's talk about nerve cells in the nervous system. So I'm going to bring up a poll on screen, and I want you to go ahead and answer in here. Let's see what you guys think. Which of the following are true of cells in the nervous system? All right, I'm seeing some good answers coming in here. Give you just a little bit longer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and broadcast, and then we're going to walk our way through these. We're going to have some great information on the slides, but it looks like you guys have a pretty good idea of what's going on here. So it looks like you guys said motor neurons are also referred to as efferent neurons, though some of us thought they were afferent. So what are afferent neurons? What's the other name for those? Yeah, absolutely. Our sensory neurons are called our afferent neurons, and as you guys said, about 89% of us agreed that sensory neurons are going from receptors to the spinal cord and brain. Okay, so you guys absolutely nailed it here that motor neurons must be referred to as efferent neurons. So what's the deal with an interneuron? What's the deal with an interneuron? Well, I love Tyler's tip down here. He likes to think of efferent exits the central nervous system, so motor neurons are bringing that signal back to the muscles. I like it. So what are these interneurons about? All right, so some good points here. They can connect our sensory and our central nervous system. They are involved in reflexes, and they're the most common type of neuron we're going to see. All right, so we already mentioned our motor neurons. These are bringing signals from the brain and spinal cord back to the muscles, exiting the CNS, so we call them efferent. Now, it's helpful to think of it in alphabetical order. We're starting with our sensory neurons. That starts with an A. We're ending up with E because it's exiting. Now, let's talk briefly about reflexes. So, what is a reflex? What is a reflex? Luke says without conscious input. Okay, so what are we not including here? What's not involved in a reflex? We're not involving the brain, okay? We're not involving the brain. Now, interneurons can be involved, but we're going to talk about two different types of reflexes. So first, let's talk about a monosynaptic reflex. A good example of this is when you go to the doctor, you almost always get this tested. What are you thinking of? The doctor's testing a monosynaptic reflex. What comes to mind here? Yeah, the knee jerk, right? They take that little hammer, they tap your patellar tendon. What happens to your leg? Yeah, your leg extends outwards. Okay, so this is a monosynaptic reflex, which means there's just two neurons involved, your sensory and your motor neuron. So when your patellar tendon is tapped with that hammer, your sensory neuron goes to your spinal cord. It's going to interface with a motor neuron. That motor neuron is going to tell your leg muscle to extend. Okay, this is kind of a simpler version of a reflex. We also have polysynaptic reflexes. A good example of this would be a withdrawal reflex. So if you're walking along the floor, suddenly you step on a thumbtack, what happens? Yeah, you're going to pull your foot away, okay? Now, Tyler gave you a good point here. That patellar tendon reflex doesn't involve interneurons, but most reflexes do. Polysynaptic reflexes are going to have one or more interneurons that are connecting sensory and motor neurons. So the key here is I both want to pull my foot away, and what else do I need to do? The one that was stepping on the thumbtack, I need to lift it up really quickly, but what else do I need to do? I need to extend my other leg to catch me. So most reflexes are more complex, okay? All right, so reflexes are pretty cool. We don't need the brain. We're just going to use that spinal cord to send quick responses back to our muscles. It's faster, so it doesn't take as much work for us. All right, so let's look at some other divisions here within the peripheral nervous system. So the somatic division of the peripheral nervous system. What's the deal here? What's somatic? Yeah, this is in our voluntary control, absolutely. So this is voluntary control of muscles, and this actually controls our five senses as well. Now, what about the autonomic nervous system? Yeah, this is involuntary, and Amber has it. Autonomic sounds kind of like automatic, and that's absolutely it. Autonomic is involuntary, it's automatic. Now we're going to talk both about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system here. So the parasympathetic division. What is kind of our nice way to remember what parasympathetic does? Absolutely, Taryn, Luke, Melanie, rest and digest. Here we're trying to conserve energy. Now, the way I like to remember this one, if you ever get confused, is if you jumped out of a plane, you'd probably freak out at first, but you have a parachute, which is going to slow you down. So parasympathetic, like parachute. Now tell me, what are some of the things we're going to see as a response to parasympathetic nervous system? What's going to happen? Lowered heart rate, for sure. Our pupils are going to constrict, very nice. What else? What else? Yeah, we're going to see contraction of our bladder because we want to basically digest and get rid of stuff. So we're going to see quite a bit of digestion involved here. So constriction of pupils, you guys said, stimulation of flow of saliva to help us start digesting foods starting in the mouth. We're going to be constricting our bronchi. We don't need as much oxygen getting in here. We're going to slow down that heart rate because this is a rest phase. We're going to stimulate peristalsis. What's peristalsis? Bellamy said it down here. What is peristalsis? Quick preview into the digestive system. It is not pooping, though that is going to be a result eventually. Yeah, it's movement through the esophagus. So after the esophagus, then you'll end up in the stomach. You're going to go through those intestines, large intestine. Then a result will be pooping, Jordan. All right, we're also going to see stimulation of bile release. So just a quick question on digestion. Where is bile produced? Ding, ding, ding. And where is bile released? Ooh, Kelly knew my next question. So it is produced in the liver, but it's released by the gallbladder. Very nice. And of course, we're going to stimulate urination by contracting our bladder. All right, so parasympathetic division, we're calming things down. We're slowing things down, and we're using this time to digest our food. Now, if we're being chased by a tiger, specifically Tyler's being chased by a tiger, I would feel really bad for him. I have sympathy for him. His sympathetic nervous system is going to kick into high gear, and he's going to probably not stay to fight the tiger. He's probably going to flee. So our sympathetic is fight or flight. So what are some of the things that Tyler's going to feel when this tiger comes after him? We'll be feeling bad for him. What's he going to be feeling? Increased heart rate, for sure. Dilation of pupils. Now remember, dilation of pupils, this all makes sense. We don't just need to memorize these things. If I'm in the jungle at night and this tiger's after me, I want to be able to see as well as possible, so I need to dilate my pupils so I can see where that tiger's going. Now, I'm going to inhibit saliva production here because I really don't want to be digesting and having to go to the bathroom while this guy is chasing me, right? So I'm going to relax the bronchi. That's going to help me breathe and get oxygen to all my muscles because I'm going to be really active here. You guys already said I'm going to see that increased heart rate. I'm going to see sweating here to help cool me off when I'm heated up. I'm going to inhibit peristalsis because I don't want to be digesting too much here. I also want to produce glucose. Why? Gotta have energy to run away from the tiger, absolutely. Okay, now our main neurotransmitter we're going to see here involved in sympathetic division is adrenaline. I forgot to ask you, but what was involved in the parasympathetic? Acetylcholine. Nice. So acetylcholine is what we think of with parasympathetic, and epinephrine or adrenaline is what we think of with the sympathetic nervous system. Very nice. Or norepinephrine, yep. And of course, we are going to inhibit our bladder contraction. Awesome work there. All right, let's try our hand at a quick question here. Autonomic nerve fibers that directly innervate the heart to cause cardiac slowing are. Now, how would we attack this question? You see some patterns in our answer choices that could probably help us eliminate. Yeah, so we get some good information in here for sure. We see that it tells us cardiac slowing, and it tells us autonomic. So autonomic, all right, all of these would work, sympathetic, parasympathetic, but cardiac slowing, what does that bring to mind here? Yeah, that makes us think parasympathetic, so immediately we can eliminate answer choices A and B. Well, how do I know if it's motor or sensory now? What in the question stem helps me figure that out? Yeah, absolutely. We see innervate the heart, so we're going to the heart muscle. Therefore, this has got to be answer choice C. Awesome job there. All right, lots more to talk about tonight. Now we're going to be diving into some more specific discussion of certain regions of the brain. Now, before we get into dealing with the embryonic brain and what different areas we're going to see, I want to test you on what happens before then. So go ahead and tell me which of the following are true with regard to neurulation. I like what I'm seeing here. I will go ahead and broadcast. It looks like pretty much all of us said the neural tube becomes the central nervous system. That is absolutely true. Now, our first answer choice, some of us liked it, but that is in fact not true. Neurulation is going to occur when the notochord causes differentiation of the ectoderm into the neural tube and neural crest cells. Now, what's going to happen to eventually give us these three different main areas? How do we get the prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon? Yeah, so neurulation here, and basically what happens is that neural tube keeps folding on itself, all right? So when it keeps folding on itself, we get these three swellings. So our three main parts of the brain here are going to be our hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. Now, which of these three areas makes up our brainstem? Which of these three areas makes up our brainstem? Yeah, absolutely. It's our midbrain and our hindbrain. So these are going to be coming first. So go ahead and tell me, the hindbrain, also known as the rhombencephalon, what is it responsible for? What's it responsible for? Yeah, it's more of our vital functions down here in the brainstem, absolutely. So digestion's a big one, heart rate control. We also have balance and motor coordination occurring down here. So some fantastic answers. Now, our midbrain, so right above our hindbrain, we can also call this our mesencephalon. What is it responsible for? What's it responsible for? So we are going to be getting, I see reflexes in here. So we do have involuntary reflexes that are caused by both visual and auditory stimuli that we're going to see in here. So this is really where we're going to see our different reflexes, our sensory motor reflexes specifically. Now, up at the forebrain, what do we have? What's up at the forebrain? Yeah, this is some of our higher function up here. The forebrain develops later, and it's going to be kind of our biggest influence on our behavior. Okay, so the absolute last thing to develop here is the cerebral cortex. We often refer to that as the neocortex because it is the newest. But you guys had it absolutely right here. This is going to be our complex perceptual, cognitive, and behavioral processes. Now, let's talk briefly about some of the other areas we're going to have here. So our rhombencephalon is actually going to divide into two different areas, our metencephalon and our myelencephalon. What is our myelencephalon becoming? Do we know? What is our myelencephalon becoming? You know, Matthew, it definitely could be tested. It's probably more typical to just understand what the function is there, but you could definitely see that terminology used. All right, nice. I like it. So it looks like Tadell and Zio's almost correct there. So the myelencephalon is going to specifically be the medulla oblongata, whereas the metencephalon is going to be the pons and the cerebellum. So you guys were right with which regions are controlled in the hindbrain, but knowing that separation can also come up here. Now, the prosencephalon, or the forebrain, also divides into two different areas, our telencephalon and our diencephalon. Now, our telencephalon, what does that become? Our telencephalon, the cortex, absolutely. We also see here our limbic system. and our basal ganglia. Now our diencephalon, this is our thalamus, our hypothalamus, and a couple other areas that we're going to talk about here in just a moment. So let's dive into some more detail on these ideas. All right, so first here, let's talk about the pons. We already said the pons is in our hindbrain down here at the bottom. What does the pons do? Melanie, I think you're asking if we have to know all of that terminology. And yep, as Tyler said, all these terms are really fair game. You could see any of them listed on here. All right, Luke says, sleep pons the bed. All right, so regulating sleep is controlled by the pons. That is true. Anything else we want to pay attention to? Yeah, I love Tyler's tip here. Most of these words you don't have to come up with on your own. They're going to be given to you there. The benefit of a multiple choice test. So we're relaying information in the pons and we're regulating sleep, as Luke said. So when we're relaying information, this is the sensory and motor pathways between the cortex and the medulla. Now, we're also going to see our medulla oblongata, which is right below the pons. What is the medulla responsible for? Yeah, absolutely. Breathing, heart rate control, blood pressure, all of these vital functions that are so important in the brainstem. All right, now we also have the cerebellum in our hindbrain. What's our cerebellum do? Yeah, balance, posture, absolutely. If you have a little bit too much to drink, this can affect your cerebellum, so you can tend to get a little clumsy, maybe tip over. So that's what our brainstem is doing down here at the very bottom in our hindbrain. Now, if we move over to our midbrain, we're going to start to see the colliculi. Now, if we start here with the superior colliculus, what does it do? Very nice, Matthew, Vinicius, Luke, absolutely. This is receiving visual input. Now, we have the inferior colliculus as well. What about it? Yeah, very nice. Here we're receiving other sensory input, including our auditory senses. Awesome. Okay, well, we've hit the hindbrain, we've hit the midbrain. I guess it's time to move on to the forebrain where all of the exciting stuff happens. All right, so let's start with the thalamus. What does the thalamus do for us? It is indeed a relay station. That is very true. It is a sensory information processing area. So basically, it's where we collect these signals and get ready to send them off to the cortex. It's also where we're going to help regulate sleep, in addition to what we talked about earlier. And this helps us with our consciousness and alertness as well. Okay, so the thalamus is pretty important. Another one that's really, really important is the hypothalamus. So go ahead and tell me, what does the hypothalamus do? It really does quite a bit for us. It does make a lot of hormones. That's very true. So I see Luke here put endocrine and homeostasis. So these are really, really true. Homeostasis is important, right? We want to maintain a balance in our body. So water balance, glucose balance, all these things. Now, in order to do that, we do have some endocrine function here producing different hormones, including thyrotropin releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone. We know all of these are going to go through our endocrine pathways. Now, we also are producing both vasopressin and oxytocin. How does vasopressin help us with water balance? Yeah, it is going to allow us to reabsorb, specifically in the kidney. There are 2 kidney channel sessions, which I highly recommend you check out. The kidney is very complex, but it's one of my favorite of the systems. Now, what about oxytocin? Another hormone produced by the hypothalamus. What does it do? Yeah, it's super involved when we're delivering babies and right after. It helps stimulate milk production and helps with uterine contractions, absolutely. So the hypothalamus does tons and tons for us. It's very important. Now there are a few specific areas of the hypothalamus we do want to be familiar with. What does the lateral hypothalamus do? What does the lateral hypothalamus do? All right, some of us absolutely nailed this. This is our hunger center. This is what makes us hungry. It's going to cause us to want to eat and drink. Now, if we have damage to the lateral hypothalamus, what's going to happen? Yeah, so we can use this to help us. We have lateral, oops, let me try that again. Lateral hypothalamus, and we can think of that as lack hunger. Okay, LH, lack hunger. All right, what about our ventromedial hypothalamus? Yeah, we're going to be skinny, is right. What about our ventromedial hypothalamus? Yeah, this is when we feel full, we're satiated, absolutely, our satiety center. Now, if we have damage here, Tadell says we're going to become obese, and that's absolutely right. We can think of this as very much hungry, all right? Very much hungry if we have damage to this area. Now, finally, we have our anterior hypothalamus. What does our anterior hypothalamus do? Yeah, this is involved in our libido. Very nice. This is our sexual behavior center. So in studies with rats, if they stimulate this behavior, rats will mount anything, even objects. Now, if we have damage to this area, the opposite is going to be true, and we're going to see asexual behavior. Yeah, those rats, when you stimulate their anterior hypothalamus, they like pretty much anything. All right. Next, let's talk about parts of the diencephalon. Let's start with our posterior pituitary. What does it do? We talked about some of the things that it does just moments ago. Yeah, you got it. This is where we're going to release antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin and oxytocin. Very nice. All right, so we have the posterior pituitary. We have one other main area here we want to talk about. And it is involved in our sleep cycles. What area of the brain is involved in our sleep cycles? The pineal gland. You guys know your stuff. And what does the pineal gland, it's up here already, I already displayed it, I can't even ask you. It produces melatonin, which is why some doctors will prescribe before they give you actual sleep aids. They'll just recommend that you take some melatonin to help you get your sleep cycles back on track. So our pineal gland is going to help us a lot with that. So if we had damage to our pineal gland, we'd probably have trouble with our sleep cycles, maybe some insomnia as a result. All right, our basal ganglia. What do our basal ganglia do for us? What do our basal ganglia do for us? Yeah, smooth movements, coordinated muscle movements. That's absolutely correct here. Now, if we have damage to our basal ganglia, what's a disease we might have? Michael J. Fox is who I always think of here. And Vinicius has got it here. Parkinson's is a really common disease we might have if we had damage to our basal ganglia. And the result of that, you're going to kind of see tremors and shakes. Now, the way that the basal ganglia works is it's receiving info from the cortex and it's sending out information using the extrapyramidal motor system. Now, what that system does is kind of take a look at how your body's positioned, how it's being carried, so that when you make movements, it's accounting for your current body position. So that's where you kind of get that fine motor movement coming out of it. All right, we also have here our limbic system. Limbic system is super important for lots and lots of things, which we're about to talk about. Let's kick it off here with the septal nuclei. What do the septal nuclei do? Ooh, I may have stumped you. Is this the first time I'm going to stump them? So Zhao says addiction, and addiction is involved here. That may give some of you a clue as to what's going on, and Chizo's got it here, absolutely. This is our pleasure center, which is why the septal nuclei are so involved in addiction, because when you activate this area you feel really, really good. All right, what about our amygdala? This is one area of the brain that almost everyone knows. If this is tested, it's guaranteed to get you points. Yeah, we have a lot of emotion in our limbic system. Our amygdala, really, we see defensive and aggressive behavior here, fear, rage, all of this happening out of our amygdala. All right, what about our hippocampus? Has the coolest name, I think. This is all about learning and memory. You got it. So this is kind of silly, but you can think hippos are kind of like elephants, and they say elephants remember everything. Oh, McDowd, I love that. That one's so much better. If you see a hippo in campus, you're not going to forget it. It's way better than my elephant one. Love that. So you guys should not ever forget what hippocampus does for us. Now, there's a pretty famous guy that was studied. His name was Henry Molaison. And poor old Henry had some problems with seizures, and so they decided to remove his hippocampus. What happened to good old Henry? If you remove a hippocampus, what do you think happened to him? Yeah, inability to form more memories. What is the term for that? If once we have damage to our hippocampus, we cannot create new memories. It is amnesia, and specifically it's anterograde amnesia, whereas retrograde amnesia would be you can't remember things that happened before the accident. Okay? You guys are killing it. All right, next here, let's talk about our cerebral cortex, which we already said is the outermost part of the brain, and it's sometimes referred to as that neocortex because it's kind of the newest part of the brain to develop. Now, our surface of the cortex has 4 lobes, which we're going to talk about. Which lobe do we see here in yellow? Which lobe do we see here in yellow? Yeah, absolutely. We see our parietal lobe, and we're going to get back to what our parietal lobe does here in just a moment. Before we do that, what do you see in red? The back of the noggin. Yeah, absolutely. This is our occipital lobe, and what does our occipital lobe do for us? Yeah, absolutely. This is where we have visual processing, including our visual cortex. All right, what do we see in green? Yeah, very nice. In green, we have our temporal lobe. And what does our temporal lobe do? Yeah, so our auditory cortex is in here. This also has to do with memory processing, emotion, language. All of this is involved here. Now, if you think about that and you realize that memory processing is involved here, we already talked about the hippocampus being involved in memory. That makes sense because the hippocampus is deep under this temporal lobe. Now, auditory cortex and language. There's another specific area that's in here, and we call it Wernicke's area. So if we have damage to Wernicke's area, what is the result? We do have trouble with language processing, that is true. All right, so there's some confusion about Broca's area and Wernicke's area, so I'm glad we brought it up. So Wernicke's area, we would call this fluent aphasia because a person can speak, but it doesn't make any sense. So they can't really understand, they're saying random words. You call that fluent aphasia. My dad actually suffered a traumatic brain injury, and he's doing much better now, but right after the accident, he had damage to this area, so he would speak, It would be in pretty normal speech patterns. It would sound like he was trying to talk, but it was completely random words strung together that made no sense at all. Now we're going to talk about Broca's area here in just a moment. Before we do that, tell me what you see in blue. Emily, he's doing so much better now. The brain is such an amazing thing, how much it can heal itself. Yeah, absolutely. The frontal lobe, very, very nice. And what is our frontal lobe responsible for? Yeah, absolutely. Our executive function, helping supervise other areas of the brain, coordinating lots of stuff together. You got it. Now, we would call this an associative area, okay? So when we're talking about associate area versus a projection area, an associate area is something that has lots of complex functions. So it's integrating different pieces of the brain together to do something. Now, projection areas are the more simple tasks. So our occipital lobe with our visual cortex, that's a projection area. It's not integrating all these different things together. Now, we see two other areas here, kind of in our dark blue. It's part of our frontal cortex. What do you see there in the middle in that kind of darker blue? Absolutely. This is our motor cortex. Our motor cortex is going to help us with our voluntary movements. Now, I mentioned Broca's area. Broca's area is also in the frontal lobe. So people with Broca's area damage, they can completely understand everything you say, but they cannot form speech. So that one's like you can understand everything, but you can never communicate with anyone because you can't form language. In most people, Broca's area is in our left hemisphere. All right, so what about this brown area? Yeah, Broca's area is broken speech. I love it, Amber. You guys have your great mnemonics. Love it. Yeah, absolutely. This is our somatosensory cortex. You got it. And this is our destination for touch, temperature, pain. All of these signals come right here. This is technically part of our parietal lobe. All right, I have another quick polling question for you, so let me bring it up. Go ahead and poll in here and tell me which things are associated with our dominant hemisphere. What's associated with our dominant hemisphere? All right, I like what I'm seeing for the most part. So this is our more analytic side of the brain, whereas our other side, our non-dominant, is going to be our more creative side of the brain. So dominant hemisphere is typically going to be left brain because most of us are right-handed. So language, logic, and math are all involved in our dominant hemisphere, whereas intuition, creativity, music, and spatial processing are all in our non-dominant hemispheres. Awesome job on that as well. You guys are just killing it tonight. You know your neuroanatomy. All right. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds. We're going to put 30 seconds on the clock, let you attack number 2 here. I will bring up a poll for you to answer in. So go ahead, take 30 seconds, knock it out. All right, go ahead and get your answers in if you have not already, and I'm going to go ahead and close it up in 3, 2, and 1. Check that out. About 89% of us here saying answer choice D. Now tell me this, do you have to know what all of these do in order to get this correct? No, absolutely not. Pick the one that you know and use strategy from there. All right, so we know the brainstem includes the medulla oblongata, and it's involved for breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, all that good stuff. Our cerebellum is our posture, balance, body movements, the thing impacted by alcohol. And of course, we have the hypothalamus, which I did not mention our nice way to remember this earlier, but I love this one. It's the 4 F's: feeding, fighting, flighting, and sexual functioning. So that's what our hypothalamus does. So as about 89% of you said here, our correct answer is answer choice D. Nicely done. All right, number 3, we've got another one. I'm going to put another 30 seconds on the clock. That should be more than enough time for you to grab this answer. Let's try and get more than 90% so I can give you my favorite pink star. Good luck. All right, get those answers in, and we are going to close it up here again in 3, 2, and 1. Looks like most of us here said answer choice C. So which of the following functions does the hypothalamus not help control? So if you see an answer choice that's controlled by the hypothalamus, you're going to get rid of it. So we're using the same thing we just talked about here, which is our 4 F's of the hypothalamus: feeding, flighting, fighting, and sexual functioning. So this is a great one to know. All right, let's wrap up today with a quick discussion of neurotransmitters. Now, one thing I want you to be really aware of here is that we're talking about neurotransmitters, not hormones. What is the difference? What is the difference? What's the difference? Neurotransmitters are much faster. The routes of delivery are different. Hormones are released into the bloodstream, and neurotransmitters are going to be acting cell to cell, much closer, much faster. Now, what I want to do here is give you a second to think about some of the neurotransmitters we're going to talk about. I want you to think about where you're going to find them, if it's going to be in the central nervous system or if it's going to be in the peripheral nervous system, and I want you to think about their function. So we're going to be looking at, I'll type them down here, acetylcholine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, if I can type these. We're going to be looking at serotonin, dopamine, GABA, and endorphins. So we're going to put 2 minutes on the clock. I want you to use this 2 minutes to think about what you do know about these neurotransmitters and where you're going to find them. We'll come back in 2 to wrap up this discussion, do a nice review of what we've seen today, and let you out of here. See you back here in 2 minutes. All right, gang, we are back. I wanted to give you a little brainstorming time because some of these don't come to mind immediately. We got to think about where we may have heard of them before and what they're involved in. So let's start this off with acetylcholine. What did we say earlier about acetylcholine? We've talked about it once already tonight. Yeah, we said it's involved in the parasympathetic nervous system. So where do we know we're going to find acetylcholine? What can we check off? CNS or PNS? Yeah, PNS for sure. But in fact, we are going to see acetylcholine in both the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, all right? So the central nervous system, here we're going to be seeing acetylcholine involved in attention and arousal. So we already know what it does. It's voluntary muscle control, parasympathetic nervous system. This is what we're going to see for acetylcholine. Now, epinephrine. Where do we see epinephrine acting? Yeah, absolutely. Epinephrine and norepinephrine are both acting in the peripheral nervous system. We said that these guys are involved in the sympathetic response, fight or flight, and in wakefulness and alertness. Okay, what about dopamine? What about dopamine? Very good. Dopamine is indeed the central nervous system. Now, one thing to note here about epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine is these are all catecholamines. That's something you might hear referring to these. Now, dopamine. What do you associate with dopamine? High levels, low levels? Very good, Matthew. So there is a dopamine hypothesis involved in schizophrenia. Very, very nice. So it is an important factor here for movement and posture. So Parkinson's, a lot of treatments are involving synthetic versions of dopamine. Very nice. All right, what about serotonin? What about serotonin? This is involved in our central nervous system. So this has a lot to do with mood. So Vinicius mentioned happiness here, and that is a factor. So we do associate serotonin with both manic and depressive states, and it would make sense that if we have lots and lots of serotonin, we're going to see a manic state, whereas if we don't have enough, we're going to see a depressive state. So very related to our moods. All right, what about GABA? Tyler's very right. Both illegal drugs and prescription drugs typically are targeting something similar to dopamine and serotonin. All right, GABA is indeed our brain stabilizer. We're going to see it in inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. You nailed it. And last one here, endorphins. What are endorphins? Yeah, these are our natural painkillers. They all are involved in the central nervous system. So unfortunately, I'm not enough of a runner to regularly get a runner's high, but they say if you pass that wall of pain, eventually your body will release those natural painkillers and you just feel great. You can run and run forever. Emily, I'm so jealous. I was just talking to someone today who does those like extreme runs, not even a marathon. He runs 20 miles every day. Then he does 50-mile runs for his like crazy races, and I was just shocked because I think the longest I've ever run is 6 miles, and that's the only time I ever had an endorphin release. I hear they're good though. I know, Kelly, that's insane. He must have a really good endorphin release on every single run to make him keep doing it. All right, you guys absolutely killed this day. One last question to wrap us up here, so let's work it together. Opiates such as morphine increase impulse traffic on PS nerves to the iris. Therefore, after a morphine injection, the pupils will be more. Now, can we use strategy to help us here? Can we use strategy to help us here? We sure can. We sure can. We can look at the fact that we have norepinephrine and acetylcholine in our answer choices. Now, which one are we looking for? Which one are we looking for? We are looking for acetylcholine, so right off the bat, we can go ahead and get rid of two answer choices, both B and D. Then we have to ask ourselves, what is acetylcholine going to do to our pupils? Absolutely, they're going to constrict. You guys absolutely nailed it. Our correct answer is answer choice A. You have done a phenomenal job tonight. I'm super impressed. There is a lot of material in here, but you guys clearly did your preview reading, and not only that, you were able to apply that knowledge to some great critical thinking questions. So we saw a lot tonight. We saw those divisions of the nervous system. We saw specific regions of the brain, and we wrapped up our discussion with neurotransmitters. Awesome work. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. You made it so wonderful. So I hope to see you again very soon on the channel. Keep up that studying. Make sure you check out the science review videos. Have a lovely evening.